Lovely to have you here. Lovely, especially to welcome Dave Millar. He's over in Adelaide, the spiritual director, I think, of the Australian New Church College. Is that the right title, Dave?
It'll do, mate. Yep, that's good. Director of Spiritual Training, I think, is the actual official title.
I should know that. I should
Yep.
know that. Welcome. Lovely to have you here. I think I've seen this talk. You've given it before with a slightly different title, but it was very good. And I'm sure we're all going to enjoy what Dave's got to say. We'll ask you, if you don't mind, everybody, just keep your microphones on mute while Dave's talking. You'll be able to unmute if you need to ask any questions. It just means that there's less distraction, less background noise. And Dave, I'll pass it across to you, mate.
All right, thank you. Look, welcome everyone. Thanks for making the time to come. So this talk is entitled Falling in Love, the Origin and Nature of Evil. That's the full title. And so what should I say to start with? This can be a difficult topic to deal with. And some of the numbers or some of the references that I'll be providing from Swedenborg's works can be quite confronting so far as its impact upon our self-image is concerned. The thing to remember is that the big picture is one of wanting to set us free from what binds us. And to that end, the material that is found in Swedenborg's writings is focused. It's focused to that end. So you may find feelings arising that in terms of a resistance to what's coming your way. But I just encourage you just to hold off reacting to what's happening in the immediate presence of those feelings, and just allow those things just to pass through your landscape, your mental landscape, just as objects in the mental landscape. And hopefully by the end we will have a good idea as to why things are stated as they are. And at least that's my hope, that we will come to see the rationale behind what's being said, because I do think that what's presented in Swedenborg's works is probably one of the best explanations for the origin of evil. Yeah, maybe you'll share that opinion at the end of this talk, maybe not, but there'll be plenty of time, I hope, for questions at the end. So I'm going to share my screen. So you won't be seeing me, I don't think, as that's done, or I'm not sure. I'm not sure how that's set up your end, Dave, but just let me share my screen and we'll get underway.
We should be able to see you, I would have thought. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
All good. Okay, so when we think about evil, we tend to think of it in terms of, the most heinous things that a human being can do. And so our thought goes to figures like Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot. There's a whole number of them down through history that we could look to and say, well, yes, their actions were definitely fall into the category of evil. But the form of evil that we're dealing with here is not so much the large scale stuff. It's the subtle nature of evil. And it's present within every human heart. And unless something is exposed and seen for what it is, we remain in a situation where it exerts an influence, but we are in denial with regard to that influence. And so we're bringing this right down to our own states of life, And if we can see how this works, then what that does for us is it opens up the possibility of seeing why what's provided by the Lord through divine revelation, by the divine, as the means for exiting what is a pernicious and destructive tendency that lies within us all. So I'm just going to read some references first, and then we will move through into a discussion around those. So this is from the work, the Arcana Celestia 7181. And it states this: nothing is more important to a person than to know whether he has heaven within him or hell, or he is going to live forever in one or the other. And to know this, it is necessary for him to know what good is and what evil is. For good constitutes heaven and evil constitutes hell. Teachings about charity show what both are. And then from the same work, number 7178, consequently, no one can examine himself unless he knows what good from its two loves is and what truth from good is, and unless he knows what evil from its two loves is and what falsity from evil is. So what we see here in terms of our spiritual life is the importance of knowing what good and evil are, and that our life depends upon knowing these things, our spiritual life. So Swedenborg has a term which is proprium, and proprium really has to do with our sense of self. And he also presents a structure of the human mind, which is a tripart structure, what he terms a natural level, a spiritual level, and a celestial level. And each of these levels have a sense of self associated with them. So we can think of these levels as also as states, and what he terms the bodily minded or worldly state, or the spiritual state or the celestial state. And so what we read regarding the bodily minded and worldly state or the natural state is the following. With the bodily minded and worldly man, the proprium, that is the sense of self, is his all. He is unaware of anything else but the proprium, that is his sense of self. And as has been stated, if he were to lose his proprium, he would think that he was dying. Then with regard to spiritual states of life, we have the following. With the spiritual man, the proprium takes on a similar appearance, for although he knows that the Lord is the life of all, and that he confers wisdom and intelligence and consequently the ability to think and to act, it is more a matter of something he says and not so much something he believes. And then the celestial state is the following. The celestial man, however, acknowledges that the Lord is the life of all, who confers the ability to think and act, because he perceives that this is so. Nor does he ever desire the proprium or sense of self. Nevertheless, even though he does not desire it, the Lord grants him a proprium which is joined to him with a complete perception of what is good and true, and with complete happiness. Angels possess a proprium such as this, and at the same time utmost peace and tranquility. For their proprium, or sense of self, has within it the things that are the Lord's, who is governing their proprium, that is, governing them by means of their proprium. This proprium, or sense of self, is utterly heavenly, whereas the proprium of the bodily-minded man is hellish. So we have these three states pertaining to a sense of self. The first state is one in which it is believed that life is intrinsic to a human being. The second state is a belief that while I feel that life is my own, I can intellectually acknowledge that there is only one source of life and can only ever be one source of life, and that as a finite being, I am a receiver of life. And while that can be acknowledged intellectually, for all practical purposes, one lives out of that state still as if life is one's own, that that life is originating from oneself. And then there's what's called the celestial state, or man, or mind. And that state is one that doesn't really even desire to have a sense of self, because it's in the full acknowledgement and perception that the Lord alone, or the divine alone, as the source of life, is the only life, and that everything else derives its life from that. So that is found in the Arcana Celestia number 141. So in summary, it's nothing more necessary to know than what good is and what evil is, what the loves of self and the world are, and what love to the Lord and love of the neighbor are. So these are key elements within Swedenborg's writings. As we have seen, he states that there are three states of self. There is a natural sense of self, a spiritual sense of self, and a celestial sense of self. And the role of the human being in this world is to move from a natural sense of self through a spiritual sense of self to a celestial sense of self. That is the progression. So what you have in those three levels is states of development, developmental phases, insofar as our sense of self is concerned. So Swedenborg has a pretty comprehensive doctrine of what he calls doctrine of influx, which is that the idea that all life flows in, that nothing of our life arises from us intrinsically, that we are in contact with spiritual associates, and that those spiritual associates are integrated into our thinking and feeling states. Everything is intimately connected, and that is something that is stated numerous times, many times in the works of Swedenborg, and he recounts his own experiences of having direct experience of all life flowing in, and witnessing when that life or when angels and spirits are separated from him, there is a reduction in his ability to think and feel. So this is, and we don't experience this directly, but what we do experience, we all experience having thoughts and feelings that we don't want. And so the question arises when that occurs, if these thoughts are thoughts I don't want, where are they coming from? And Swedenborg would say that it's due to influx. It's the influx that's from the spiritual world into our minds that manifests as thoughts and feelings, and that we are intimately related to those who are in the spiritual world, and all the way back to the Lord, or to what is opposed to the Lord. So we are kind of in a midway state where we receive what is from heaven and what is from hell, flowing in as impulses toward what is good, or impulses toward what is opposed to what is good, or in Swedenborg's terminology, what is evil. Okay, so these are a couple of numbers that just highlight that. So this is from the Arcana Celestia again, number 5847. No man, spirit, or angel possesses any life that originates within himself. That being so, there is nothing he thinks or wills that can originate in himself. For a person's life consists in his thinking and willing, and his words and actions are the life that springs from them. There is only one life, the Lord's. It flows into everyone, but is received in varying ways, its reception being determined by the character a person has given his soul through the life he leads. While a person lives in the world, he is providing an outward form for the most pure substances that constitute his interiors, so that one may speak of him bringing form to his own soul, that is, fashioning its character. This form determines how the Lord's life, flowing from his love toward the entire human race, is received. So, just in summary, there is only one life, the Lord's, and the task for human beings in the world is to bring form to their own souls. So, that is a statement regarding the purpose that human beings have, the task, the great work, if you like, that human beings have, which is to bring what is higher into what is lower, into a form by which what is higher can be held in the lower. So this is what's being opened up for us here. Okay, so what is believed matters. And this is just another quote from Heaven and Hell, number 302. Few believe that angels are conjoined to man, still less that they are in his thought and affection. Nevertheless, there is such a conjunction that man is unable to think the least thing apart from the spirits are joined to him, and on this his spiritual life depends. The cause of ignorance of this matter is man's belief that he lives from himself without a connection with the first being of life, and that he does not know that this connection exists by means of the heavens. And yet, if that connection were broken, man would instantly fall down dead. If man believed, as is really true, that all good is from the Lord and all evil from hell, he would not make the good in him a matter of merit, nor would evil be imputed to him, for he would then look to the Lord in all the good he thinks and does, and all the evil that inflows would be cast down to hell whence it comes. But because man does not believe that there is any influx into him either from heaven or from hell, and so supposes that all the things that he thinks and wills are in himself, and therefore from himself, he appropriates the evil to himself, and the inflowing good he defiles with merit. So a series of numbers, I suggest that some of those things may be things that are difficult to hold. But before moving on, I'm happy to just happy for you to express any comments or perhaps ask any questions around that before we move on.
So I'll just remind you, if anybody wants to ask a question, they'll just need to unmute their microphone.
Yeah. So man gets the wrong idea of the whole situation, and so supposes that all the things that he wills are in himself. Because of that false idea, he sort of gets condemned or punished for it by appropriating the evil to himself. So it's a false concept then that he has in the first place that can bring him to grief in this situation. So you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, look, and it's a great point that you make. And so what what Swedenborg opens up for us is the idea that we're only accountable for what we know. We're accountable for responding to the truth that we have, and that there is protection, which is what he calls the innocence of ignorance. So so the thing to remember is that all activity, so far as the Lord's inflow into human beings, is enacted from pure mercy and love. So while we may and we're all in false concepts about things, right? Like no one possesses the truth as it is in itself. So we all have things that are attached to our thinking that are false, and we all have inclinations to states of selfishness which we enact out of. The protection is that more often than not, those actions occur unconsciously, and if they do occur consciously and there is remorse and a willingness to look at what's happened and to seek to amend our life, then that opens the way for a heavenly inflow to move into our minds.
It's such an important concept, this principle that what we believe really matters, and it can cause us a lot of pain, harm. I'm just wondering, does it say something like that in the Bible? That thing that everything good is from God and everything evil is from ourselves or from hell? Is there a sort of a related piece of information in the Bible that says that?
Yeah, there was the rich young ruler came to Jesus, said, "Good master," and Jesus replied that, "Why call me good? There is none good but God." So that's one occurrence of referencing God as being that from which all good flows.
Oh,
yeah. And because God is good and God is love, then he cannot do evil and cannot be the originator of evil. So then the question arises, okay, so where does evil come from? And so we're going to be looking at that as we move forward.
Thank you.
I've got a question. Suppose someone says, you've done a good job, right? How are you supposed to respond to it? Are you supposed to, so that you're not defiled so you don't defile yourself with merit? Are you supposed to say, "Oh, thank you," but then you sort of defile yourself with merit, right? How do you respond to a compliment like that?
Well, I think to be defiled with merit is a matter of where we're at so far as our willing is concerned. So social convention could require us to thank the person for what they've said, but internally we're not receiving that thanks. We're in an acknowledgement that all good is from the Lord. So in that case, there's you're not claiming merit.
You don't say that. Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
I had, as far as that goes, you would just think that you wouldn't say that to the person. You would say thank you, but you'd think to yourself, it comes from the Lord.
Right.
You wouldn't necessarily say. What I want to say is, it seems to refute a bit about all evil or negative things come from hell. I don't have any evil thoughts, but I do have some negative thoughts, and they're usually past memories, past unpleasant memories, and they're sometimes triggered by things, could be things that people have said to me in the past that were unpleasant, things that I'd done that I have remorse for. I classify them more as memories, and they come to me without me wanting them to. And yeah, I find that is difficult, and how to get rid of them. And positive for no, it's my clock. Good thoughts, I sometimes attract myself by reading spiritual things and by doing meditations, and I seek the good thoughts rather than they just come to me.
Yes, so yeah, and I mean that's a common experience for us all, I think, what you describe. And so it's, so what do we do with these things that arise, unbidden? So one way we could look at it is that nothing arises that the Lord doesn't allow to arise. And so often things that have happened in the past can, the residue of them can sit below a conscious level and be having an impact on our quality of life. And sometimes we reach a point where what is good and true has been integrated to a point where those past events or situations and circumstances can be brought to mind. And as they are brought to mind, often it can be a case of that what has been worked into our life at the point where they're brought into mind means that they can be processed in a different way to perhaps how they were originally experienced.
Mm.
So it can be an opportunity for growth, using those memories as the basis for, stepping back and allowing insight to come as to what it is that what's being asked of us in that situation, if we're not sort of overwhelmed with what's arising, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's just move on. So this just unpacks a bit more of these different levels and what's going on. And again, just bear with me. Just hold what arises as we go forward, and we'll see where we go. So just this is the quote straight out of the number we just read, which was 141. With the bodily minded man and worldly man, the proprium is his all. He is unaware of anything else but the proprium, that is the sense of self that he possesses. And as has been stated, if he were to lose his proprium, he would think that he was dying. The proprium of the bodily minded man is hellish. Another quote from the work Divine Providence, 215. We are born into utter evil, and that is what we inherit. And what we inherit is nothing but evil. What we inherit is the sense of self that encompasses us and that we participate in by virtue of our self-love, especially by our love of being in control because of our self-love. This is because when we are wrapped up in this love, we are totally focused on ourselves and therefore immerse our thoughts and feelings in our own sense of self-importance. And from the work, the Arcana Celestia, 10,035. Be it known further that all the proprium of the will of man is evil, because from himself man loves nothing but himself and the world. And if he loves his neighbor, it is for the sake of himself. Therefore, he must be regenerated, and through regeneration receive a new will. But the will which he receives through regeneration is not of the man, but of the Lord with man. And this is the sense of self of the spiritually minded. Just a few more numbers on this one. With the spiritual man, the proprium takes on a similar appearance as with the natural man. For although he knows that the Lord is the life of all, and that he confers wisdom and intelligence, and consequently the ability to think and to act, it is more a matter of something he says and not so much something he believes. And from the Arcana Celestia 981, spiritual people might know intellectually that the human race is such that is nothing but evil in itself, but they do not accept it internally because they hold fast to their sense of self-sufficiency and love it. And then finally from the Arcana Celestia number 1661. While we are at the stage of imagining that goodness and truth come from ourselves and that the strength to resist is ours, the goodness and truth with which we fight evil and falsity are neither good nor true, even though it may seem to be so. An inflated sense of self lurks inside them, and we take credit for the victory. We pride ourselves on having conquered evil and falsity, when it is the Lord alone who fights and wins. No one can see no one can see the truth of this but those reborn through times of tribulation. And the celestially minded. The celestial man, however, acknowledges that the Lord is the life of all, who confers the ability to think and act, because he perceives that this is so. Nor does he ever desire the proprium. Nevertheless, even though he does not desire it, the Lord grants him a proprium, which is joined to him with a complete perception of what is good and true, and with complete happiness. Angels possess a proprium such as this, and at the same time utmost peace and tranquility, for their proprium has within it things that are the Lord's, who is governing their proprium, that is governing them by means of their proprium or sense of self. Okay, so just by way of implication, so far as those numbers are going, have explained. So we have a natural, a spiritual, and a celestial aspect, and that aspect has to do with a natural, a spiritual within the natural, and a celestial level within the natural. So we're working, all regeneration of the human mind occurs on its external, on the external plane, because that plane is the plane in which the sense of self is strongest, and our identification with what flows in is, well, initially the identification is complete and total. We think our thoughts and our feelings arise from within us, that we are the producers of them, and we have no idea otherwise. And that highlights the need for instruction concerning how the human mind operates and how it is, how it stands in relation to spiritual forces that are within. So the Lord alone has life. The divine is the source of all life. No other being exists that has life in itself. Every other being is a receiver of life from that one source of life. And so we call this divine influx, and the divine influx moves into the various aspects of or the various senses of self that are in existence. And so in this area here, can you see my cursor, by the way? Is that, yeah, thanks. So this is the self that is the natural self. In the central sort of area is the spiritual self. And over here on the right-hand side is the celestial self, sense of self. Now, divine influx, when it moves into the human mind, animates the form of the mind that it's being received into. So if I believe that I am an autonomous, independent being, then that life that's flowing in will present as if I am an autonomous, independent being. It will affirm the beliefs that are within my mind. And so we have this divine influx moving into the natural self, which believes itself to be an autonomous, independent being. That's what the AIB there is. That influx enlivens us, and it gives us a sense of being an I am. I exist. I have a sense of myself as an autonomous, independent being, separate from all others and also separate from the source of life. Now, what operates here in this realm are the loves of self and loves of the world. So because I believe I'm an autonomous, independent being, I stand in resistance to that inflow that is coming by means of divine influx, which of course has within it the idea, if you like, that there is only one life, and that life is the Lord's, and that you are not an autonomous, independent being, but that you are in connection with all other beings to some degree or another, right? So this life is flowing in, but I become separated from the Lord so far as my own sense of the Lord is concerned, or the sense of the divine, and I stand as an isolated, independent individual. That's how I experience myself. And what we see in this is that the sense of I am, the use of pronouns that we have, is really an attribution to ourselves of the name of the Lord. I mean, the Lord declared himself to Moses to be Jehovah, or I am that I am. And so when we claim life as our own, then what is of the Lord can't flow into that. It can't flow into that in the sense of bringing what is heavenly into that, because it is in total contradiction to what the reality of the situation is. And the reality is that the Lord alone has life, right? Or the divine alone has life. So when I speak in terms of personal pronouns, I am really claiming life as my own. It is a form of taking the Lord's name in vain, essentially. And in this state, I am seeing the appearance that I have life in myself as real. I'm taking it as real. So it is one thing to experience the feeling of having life in oneself and the feeling that it originates in oneself. But it is a leap to take that as evidence that we actually have life in ourselves. So those two things are different things. So we are all given the feeling that we have life in ourselves, and that is what gives us a sense of otherness from the divine and from other people. And so can also be the means by which the divine enables what is created to have a relationship with it. So we have to have a feeling of life in ourselves in order to in order to reciprocate so far as our relationship to the divine is concerned. So the idea is that the divine, or the definition for what is divine, is that it has life in itself. That is a definition for the divine. The definition for what is finite or what is created is that it is a receiver of life. It doesn't have life in its originating in itself. So then, how then does the divine love bring into being what is other than itself, by which it can bestow all that it is on another and have that as a reciprocating relationship? It has to give the created being a sense of being independent and autonomous, but it also needs to convey to that being that is an appearance, and that the divine alone has life in itself. And in that way, then we are in a position whereby we can receive what is of the divine, but not look to possess it as our own, but to acknowledge that it is the Lord's life that we are receiving. So there's a delight in feeling that life is our own, and all our motivations issue forth from that feeling. So love requires it as the basis of reciprocation, because without reciprocation, there is no love. And so if we didn't have that sense of independence, that appearance of independence, we would just be an automaton. We would have no agency. And there needs to be agency if there is to be a reciprocation of love between us and the divine. But when that feeling is interpreted as us actually having life in ourselves, that is the origin of evil. That is when the false idea that I am a self arises, and I then work to maintain the illusion that I am a self. And in order to maintain that illusion, I have to protect myself. And out of that flows all the propensity for human beings to, enact actions that are not conducive to actually loving relationship. They enact actions that are actions of defensiveness, of the need to protect, to own, to hold, to possess. All of those elements all arise out of this need to constantly reaffirm that I am an independent, autonomous being, to fight, to resist any notion that that is not the case. So, so that state is what gives rise to what is termed hell as a state within us. So hell is really the idea of being totally self-absorbed and believing in myself rather than believing in what divine revelation states is the case. So what arises out of this is a need to acquire, and what we do over time is we acquire an identity. And what's interesting about the word identity is that if you look at the root, which is found in the center of the word here, which is dent, we get the term dental from it. It also carries the idea it's an Indo-European root word, and it also carries the idea of to knead dough or to knead together constituents to form a mass. And so the concept here in terms of the dental aspect is to masticate, or to, again, it carries the idea of what is within the mouth being masticated into a mass. And so identity has this idea, the root of that word has the idea of gathering together what's needed in order to form or to bring into being a form. That's what this idea of identity, and of course the term I there is self-reference. So we spend a lot of our energy in this state in acquiring, whether it's knowledge, whether it's possessions, whatever it happens to be, that we identify with as ourself. And this builds up our sense of being an autonomous, independent being, because if I can possess things, then there must be something that is possessing them, and that agent that is possessing them is myself. And so this reinforces the idea that we are an independent, autonomous being. Interestingly, this idea is captured also in the idea of fracturing. Identity carries the idea of fracturing within it, or bits and pieces being pulled together in order to form some aspect of oneself. And the Hebrew word for evil is ra, and that word is translated as dysfunctional. It means dysfunction, but it also carries the idea of separating, fracturing, or what is dualistic in nature. So this push toward an identity, or building an identity through life, is what is termed building up our sense of self. And it is that sense of self that we have to, at some point, or are required to give up in order to receive a new self. So he who loses his life for my sake shall find it, is what the Gospels state. But it also states, he who finds his life shall lose it. And so there is a need for us to build up, or have built up within ourselves, a sense of self as an autonomous, independent being, so that we can then go into another phase of development whereby that self has to then be given up in order that we might receive a new self. And it has to be given up freely. So we have to be brought to a place where we're willing to lay down the self that we have acquired through our contact with the world, and take on that self that is offered by the Lord through his offering of what is good and true, to acquire what is good and true over what is evil and false. So one of the things that arises from the sense of self, so if we have a belief in ourself at the center of all things, then everything that is acquired around that will take the form of reinforcing the idea that I am a self. And this is true so far as natural religion is concerned. Natural religion is focused on the moral and civil aspects of life, and it defines evil in terms of what is moral and civil. Whereas what is defined as evil in the writings of Swedenborg is actually what is of a spiritual nature, and the two things are not the same. The moral and civil are the symptomology of a deeper set issue, which is this belief in oneself. And so what natural religion offers is the form of religion which is about trying to become a better person. And the idea of trying to become a better person is tied up with a judgment about what is good and what is evil from a moral and civil perspective. And we see examples of this, or good examples of natural religion in the Gospels with regard to the Pharisees, the religious sect that stood opposed to what the Lord Jesus Christ was bringing so far as his teaching was concerned. And so these two things came into conflict. And the reason they came into conflict was because in a natural state of religion, what is held above all else is one's external projection. That the externals are attended to while the internals are not even acknowledged in a lot of cases. So what you see in a natural form of religion is the idea of self-righteousness and self-loathing. These two things tend to go together. So in my effort to become a better person, I fail. At some point, that's a given. And I get locked into a cycle of feeling good about the situation and then falling into self-loathing because I'm not making the grade or the standard that I set for myself so far as what constitutes good behavior versus not good behavior. We can also call this a merit-guilt cycle. So we tend to be feeling good when we are on track, or we feel we're on track. And then as soon as something knocks us off track, we fall into a sense of guilt. And this is just like a recurring state that goes, that repeats itself over and over again. This cycle repeats itself over and over again. And the fact that, the problem here is that the I is still at the center of all this. And of course, what is being revealed through this process is that you cannot make this better. You can't make what is opposed to what is of heaven something heavenly. And so this is always doomed to failure. And so the sense of self that is trying to become a better person is always going to fail, because there's always going to be a situation or circumstance in which it's not going to be able to maintain what it feels is a good life or good behavior. So, we will always be tripped up in our selfishness. And so this has to be given up. This idea that we can become a better person has to be given up. And it can only be given up when we lay down our life and look to the Lord to supply what's needed for us. And then it becomes a case of not trying to become a better person, but trying to not identify with what's flowing in, to recognize that what is flowing into the landscape of our mental world are just objects in the landscape, and that they are no more of us than the things in our physical landscape are of our bodies. So the things in the mental landscape are things in a landscape. And the more that we can become detached from identifying with what's flowing in and recognizing the quality of it, the freer we become. And that freedom then enables what is of a higher quality to be inworked into our life. So this idea of that I am has to become a sense of I am not. And this here is taken from the words of John the Baptist. When he was confronted by the Pharisees and scribes as to who he was, he said, I am not. He negated the idea that he was an independent, autonomous being and acknowledged that the Lord alone has life. That was one way of reading what was going on there. And this I am not is then going to have to move from what is of a spiritual quality, that is, there is an acknowledgement, I am not, but for all intents and purposes, there is still a life being led as if I am. And this is the struggle of what is termed the spiritual sense of self. The spiritual sense of self is in the acknowledgement of truths, but isn't yet in the life of them. It isn't yet able to live from those truths as something real. It is still stuck in the idea that it is an independent, autonomous being, but it has ideas that can moderate those tendencies that flow out of that idea. So this is what is termed metanoia. Metanoia, or it's translated as repentance, but it actually means a change of mind, a change in belief structures. And that change in belief structures, where we recognize that we are a receiver of life as opposed to having life being a source of life, is what this is really about. So what is revealed in Swedenborg's writings is that we don't have a self, but we have what's termed an as of self. And the as of self concept is one which is, it's a powerful concept, because if you think about Eastern religions versus Western religion, Eastern religions tend toward absorption in the divine. And out of that comes the idea that we all are divine. That's the Eastern tendency. The Western tendency is towards believing in myself as a God, essentially, as an individual, as an autonomous, independent being. So both poles end in a belief in oneself as the source of life, of one's own life. What Swedenborg brings is this idea of an as of self. And the as of self is what stands between those two poles and enables us not to become identified with either end of that spectrum. So when we recognize that we are not a self, but an as of self, we open ourselves up to having a sense of self implanted, which is aligned with reality as opposed to being opposed to reality. And so with the belief that I am, appearance is seen as real. So the feeling that I have life in myself is seen as reality. For this state of I am not as an as of self, the real is seen in the appearance, and the real is the Lord as the only life is seen. The appearance is seen through. And so in that sense, we are set free from the idea that we are the source of our own life. So through this spiritual phase of development, the spiritual sense of self, while loving the feeling of having life in itself, intellectually acknowledges that this is apparent. This is an appearance. And so through this phase of development toward this sense of self, there is a struggle of movement between recognizing and acknowledging what truths teach and falling back into believing the feeling is the reality. The feeling that I have life in myself is the reality. And so this movement across this middle zone here is when spiritual life really begins. And it's a life of putting off what is opposed to what truths teach and putting on what they teach. And in doing so, moving toward what is good, moving from truth toward what is good. So the struggle that occurs here occurs because, and what I've just termed this as rust, which basically means the residue of unresolved sensual thinking. Okay, so it's this residue of unresolved sensual thinking that clings to us, the dust of the ground, if you like, that keeps pulling us back into this, whereby we have to then gone the wrong way. Reorientate ourselves so that we can continue on working with what's arising within that is opposed to how things actually are. And so that is a lifetime of work, right? Whereby we are constantly being put in front of what opposes heaven and looking to have that sloughed off so that what is of the Lord can be implanted. So it's basically a process of exchanging false ideas, false perspectives, and the evils that are associated with those for a truer perspective and the good that is associated with that life. So what's the difference so far as the process of salvation is concerned? From a natural perspective and from a natural religious perspective, salvation is related to ourself. From a natural religious perspective, we see ourselves, this here, as that which is in need of saving. From a spiritual perspective, it is actually we are being saved from ourselves. So salvation is not about saving what is opposed to the Lord or transforming this into something heavenly, because what is of hell cannot be transformed into what is of heaven. It is actually the process of salvation involves being moved away from this and into what is termed a heavenly proprium, or into what is good and true that is acknowledged and experienced as being from the Lord, right? So this identity that has been built up through the love of self and love of the world is not being saved. That actually has to be laid down. We are being saved from ourself. And that is a very different perspective to what we are normally brought into contact with. So we start out looking to have ourselves saved, but through the process of spiritual work, we come to see that that is not the thing to be saved, that we are to be saved from this. And that is how we enter into a new self. And so the word for good in Hebrew, which is here, is the word tov, and it means what is functional, or it carries overtones of conjunction or connection. All things being connection, has the idea of what is holistic, speaks of wholeness, and it has this non-dual aspect to it, which means that, yes, I still have a sense of self. I haven't lost my sense of self, but I'm fully aware that that sense of self is an appearance and that the Lord alone has a self. And that puts us into a state of being able to receive what is of heaven. And that is what brings what was described earlier on in one of those numbers, the tranquility and peace that angels are in. So what is the end result of all this? So just by way of finishing off, so this reading from the Arcana Celestia number 30 states this: the progression of faith with those who are being created anew is as follows. At first they have no life, for it is only in the good and the true that there is life, and none in the evil and false. Afterwards they receive life from the Lord by faith, first by faith of the memory, which is a faith of mere knowledge, next by faith in the understanding, which is an intellectual faith, and lastly by faith in the heart, which is the faith of love or a saving faith. And then from the Gospel of Matthew, 16, chapter 16, verses 20 to 26, 24 to 26. Then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? So we're aware of the two trees in the garden. And so this belief in oneself ultimately leads to a state of materialistic thinking, literalism, and this becomes deterministic. And we see this in terms of, within our society today, like they have more and more idea of determinism. It becomes reductionistic. People are no longer seen as human beings full of potential, but become commodities that can be exploited by others. We move into states of inflexibility. We're looking constantly to control things. There's a state of dominating situations so that we don't have to deal with what we find difficult. So if we can control situations, then we feel much better about ourselves. But as soon as we start losing our ability to control a situation, then a whole lot of negative things start to appear. There's also a life that is mechanistic in the sense that all things start to just be reduced down to their component parts, as opposed to finding how things are related together. And this is a state of idolatry. And by idolatry is meant that it is purely external. It's an external life. And what's lost through that external life focus is that there is anything interior or higher. And we lose touch with what our true inheritance is. And that is all fed by this idea of what is evil and false. So the end result of living out of the senses is anxiety, depression, and meaninglessness. Whereas if we are willing to lay down that life and look to the Lord, look to what is good and true, and have that established in us as our new sense of self, then we make this transition across this spiritual zone, which involves spiritual work of self-examination and repentance. And so self-examination can be thought of both in terms of being in touch with the quality of what's arising within, but it also can be thought of in terms of examining the nature of the self. What is it actually? What is our self? What we experience as our self? Is that something we really want to be attached to? The celestial life leads to faith, hope, and love. And it is fed by what is loving and wise, which is the Lord, And then we have the fruits of that, which is true freedom. It's indeterminate, possibilities endless, limited potential. It is a life that is full of meaning and purpose. We become malleable rather than rigid and controlling. And this is what brings about wholeness and true human creativity. Yep. So it's time's moving on. So I'll leave it there. Yeah, and just open for questions and comments.
Again, just to remind you to unmute if you've got a question you want to share with Dave.
Oh, thank you, David. That was really good. I was wondering about something you said earlier when you said that the Lord only allows things to happen if something good can come out of them. And yesterday I was working on this toy as a target for a Nerf gun. And my daughter, who was shooting the Nerf gun, and I said that what I've been wasting my time with lately. And she said, that's not a waste of time. If that's a waste of time, then everything is a waste of time. And I thought, oh, maybe it wasn't. I mean, maybe something can come out of something even so trivial and that seems like a waste of time. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think like there's a teaching which states that that the Lord's providence is in every detail. So, if we can bring a highest perspective to things, then everything is of value, right? Like everything can be of value because it brings us closer to seeing what is good and true, and so there are the situations and circumstances that we're in, and then there is the perspective we bring to them, and that can make all the difference. I think that's
On something that's not that important, but the pronunciation of that Greek word, Metanoia, well, the OI or the Omicron Iota in the middle of that word, when in Greek you put those two letters together, Omicron Iota together, they're pronounced E. So it's not metanoia, it's actually metania.
Metanoia. Thank you. Yep.
Metania, yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. Yep.
That's right.
Are there any other questions for David? We're stunned silent at the moment, contemplating a lot. I guess, Dave, what really struck me is the idea of that identity is not, we're not seeking to save that identity. I liked on your previous slide, the circle at the top with salvation and oneself, and that, up there at the top in the middle, that's just a really interesting way of putting it. We think of ourselves and this desire for salvation for ourselves, and yet that is the very thing that we cling to that prevents us from finding salvation.
Right.
So yeah, that in particular was really interesting to me.
George Harrison summed it up in a Hindu-based text or song. All through the day, I me mine, I me mine. All I can say is I me mine, I me mine.
Yeah, I remember that.
Do you remember that?
I don't, but
That song,
it's
me, mine, yeah.
yeah. It makes the point. It certainly makes the point.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of songs, so I just want to finish. I just want to. It's a song called "I Am," by an artist called Stan Walker, who is a New Zealand artist. So I'm partial to New Zealand artists just through my own background. So, but this song has it's a powerful song, and I think it sort of captures a lot of what we've been talking about tonight. So.
Thanks very much, Dave, for your presentation tonight. It's always fascinating to hear what you have to say. Has anybody got any last-minute questions before we close off tonight?
So after seeing the video, I don't think we have to wait for the second coming. I think we just saw Jesus Christ himself with tattoos.
I thought it was very nice, except if I could make a suggestion, if there's a version of it with the lyrics, because I found it hard to make out the words. Yeah, a version with the lyrics would have been better, I thought. I mean, but I enjoyed the music. I thought it was nice. It's a nice video, but I couldn't make out a lot of the words.
A lot of them were in Maori.
Oh, were they?
Yeah.
That's why it was all Greek to us.
Can it be translated into Greek for me?
No,
We'll look. In any case, what we tend to do is put our we put these talks up on YouTube. Yeah. I'll get the links from Dave for those videos, so we might even get one with a translation, perhaps, or get YouTube to do it for us. Hey, maybe the AI engine copes with Maori, I imagine. Yeah. Anyway, look. Are there any other questions?
I remember an incident when Swedenborg saw some spirits and they all said to him, "Who are we? What are we?" And Swedenborg answered, "You're nothing, but it pleases the Lord to make you something." You don't remember that one?
That's nice.
That's great.
Did anybody hear?
Yeah.
Yeah, we heard. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, look, thanks very much, everybody, for being part of tonight. Thanks, Dave, for coming and talking to us. It's been great to have you again. We look forward to bringing you in sometime in the unknown future. I'm sure we'll have you back. I do want to let everybody know what's going on in November. So our next meeting is the last Friday in November, the 29th. We are hoping to have something here face-to-face rather than online. Neville and I were sort of putting our heads together and thinking about trying to find a venue, possibly having some dinner together. So look, just keep your eye out for the publicity information around that. If anybody's got a good venue that they think they could recommend that we could go to, then I would be very happy to hear about that. And you'll be hearing from me on that occasion. I'll be talking about the work of Julian Jaynes on the bicameral mind and how that compares with the work of Swedenborg. So that's our topic for November. We won't have a meeting in December because that will be very close to the end of the year, beyond Christmas. We'll probably resume again, I would say, in February in the new year. But look, do mark the 29th of November in your diary, please. And as I say, we'll hope to have something face-to-face and enjoy some dinner together before the talk. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming along. Thanks again, Dave.
Thank you.
And
Pleasure.
look forward to hearing you again soon. Good.
All right. See
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Good night.